Hi, fifth graders. We are back to do our last read aloud of the week of Save Me a Seat. It's going to be a little bit of a longer one. So get ready. All right. So we left off with Joe realizing that somebody, Ravi, has put a blue M&M in his glass dish after Dylan had stolen it. And we learned that Ravi brought leeches for his personal reflection object, but we don't know why yet. All right, chapter 39, Ravi. I'll get us started, says Mrs. Beam as she reaches into the basket. She pulls out a card and reads it aloud. On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scouts law. That's easy, shouts Dylan, jumping out of his seat. It's Selena. Who else would be dorky enough to still be in the Girl Scouts in fifth grade? Mrs. Beam's eyebrows are twitching. As I explained a moment ago, Mr. Samreen, she says, the person who reads the sentence is the only one who's allowed to guess. In this case, that person would be me, not you. Dylan sits back down and Mrs. Beam walks over to Selena's desk. She's the girl in the green uniform who had brought my things to the nurse's office. Is it you, Selena? Mrs. Beam asks, placing the card next to the loop of green cloth with medals and badges on it. Selena blushes and nods her head. Now it's your turn, says Mrs. Beam, holding the basket out to her. Selena pulls out a card and reads, Belongs have more fun. Gee, I wonder who that could be, Dylan says. Selena walks over to Lucy Mulligan and places the card next to the silver hairbrush sitting on her desk. Is it you? She asks Lucy. Duh, Dylan sneers. Of course it's her. This game is a joke. Mrs. Beam frowns at him, then holds out the basket to Lucy, who reaches in and pulls out the next card. I rule, she reads. I'll give you a hint, says Dylan. He turns on the ridiculous plastic star and the music starts blasting again. Dylan jumps up on his chair, sticks out his long tongue, and starts waving it to the music. The way it moves reminds me of the leeches wriggling in Paripa's tea strainer. Mrs. Beam's eyebrows are not twitching any longer. They have become a straight line. She walks over and turns off the music. Get down from your chair, she says. As Dylan starts to climb down, he happens to glance over at Bigfoot's desk. When he sees the blue candy in the bowl, his eyes go very wide, and a look of pure shock comes over his face. Yes. Chapter 40, Joe. Do you know who the card belongs to? Mrs. Beam asks Lucy. Lucy nods but doesn't move. Is something the matter, Lucy? Mrs. Beam asks again. I don't want to see the leeches, she whispers. What's so scary about a couple stupid old worms? Sneers Dylan. Ever since Mrs. Beam shut down his superstar routine, he's been acting kind of grumpy. Lucy gives him a dirty look. Hallelujah! Maybe this means the wedding is finally off. Ravi has his hand up. Yes, Ravi, Mrs. Beam says, and I notice she says his name right for the first time, with the accent on the second syllable. Could you please tell Lucy Mulligan that the lid on the jar is screwed on very tight? My grandfather and I made sure of that. The leeches will not escape. Nothing to worry about. See? And he lifts the jar and turns it upside down. No water leaks out. But turning the jar over like that gets the leeches all freaked out, and they start wriggling around even more. I expect Lucy to start screaming again, but instead she walks over and tosses the card down on Dylan's desk without even looking at him. Then she turns and smiles at Ravi. I didn't know you knew my name, she says, tilting her head to one side. I look at Dylan to see what he's making of this disgustingly mushy moment. But he isn't paying attention to Lucy. He's got his eyes glued on the jar of leeches. I know that look. I've seen it 1,000,000 times before. Chapter 41, Ravi. It's your turn to pick a card, Mrs. Beam says, holding the basket out to Dylan. He groans. This game is so lame. What's the point? You can't even win. Try to muster a bit more enthusiasm, will you please? Says Mrs. Beam. Not every game has to be about winning. If you ask me, Dylan is getting off easy. Mrs. Arun would have made him kneel on the floor or sit facing the wall if he had talked back to her like that. Dylan makes a big show of swirling his hand in the basket to stir up the card. His overacting is even worse than Shakti Kapoor's. I can't believe I ever wanted to be his friend. Abracadabra, he says, pulling out a card and waving it in the air like he's done something special. Nobody responds, not even Lucy Mulligan, who's busy staring at me for some reason. Dylan shakes his hair out of his eyes and reads what's written on the card. Quitting is not an option. He rolls his eyes. Gee, I wonder who this could be. And then he marches straight over to Tim or Jim, I still don't know which one it is, and puts the card down on his desk. Is it you? Dylan asks in a voice that says he is confident his guess is correct. Nope, says Tim Jim, shaking his head. Not me. Dylan can't believe his ears. What do you mean it's not you? He says. It has to be you. Everybody knows you're the kid who just won't quit. Tim Jim looks at him and shrugs. It's not me, he says again. You see, Mrs. Beam's pistachio eyes are twinkling like little green stars. Maybe this game isn't so easy after all. Well, if he didn't write it, who did? Asks Dylan, looking around the room. I wink at him and smile. I did, I say. Chapter 42. Joe. He cheated, shouts Dylan. That's why I couldn't guess it. What do leeches have to do with quitting? Would you like to come up to the front of the class and tell us how the two things are connected, Ravi? Personally, I would have been sweating bullets if Mrs. Beam made me stand up in front of everybody like that. But Ravi doesn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looks happy. He pushes up his glasses and clears his throat like he's about to give a speech or something. I'm listening, but I'm also keeping an eye on Dylan in case he tries to mess with Ravi's leeches while he's busy giving his speech. Quitting is not an option, Ravi says. This is what my father taught me and what his father taught him and what I will teach my own son someday too. Big deal, says Dylan. What does that have to do with leeches anyway? I told you he cheated. Shh, says Mrs. Beam. Go on, Ravi. Ravi pushes up his glasses again. I haven't prepared anything else today, but I could tell you a story if you'd like. And that's where we're going to stop. So that is the end of our read alouds for this week. Stay tuned to find out what Ravi's story is that he tells the school and what might happen towards the end of our book, because we are nearing the very, very end now. We've got just that many pages left. All right, so stay tuned for next week's read aloud.